And we're back. We're back with some more gear. You just never know what's gonna be brought out next. So I've mentioned these before, but here they are in real life. So these are 4 cymbals out of the Sabian Big and Ugly cymbal collection. I don't remember exactly when the Big and Ugly collection came out, but they had, as far as I know, they had 7 cymbals. I'm sorry, they had 6 cymbals. It might have been 7, depending on how you want to, depending on how you want to classify what makes them what they are. So these are 4 of them. Let's see, we've got, starting from my far right, we have the HHX Phoenix, we have the HH King, we have the HH Nova, and the HH Pandora. The other ones that I know of for sure were part of the Big and Ugly collection was the XSR Monarch and the AA Apollo. And there's some debate as to whether or not the AAX Muse was part of this collection or not. But the AAX Muse was a cymbal that they made, and it had a very similar, it had the same kind of idea. Now, from what I understand, they started playing around with a lot of different patinas and ways in which to finish the cymbal after it was made. So, like, for example, the AA Sick Hats as well as the AA Apollos got dipped in a saltwater bath, and it's part of the reason why they have all of these really cool patterns and things in them. On top of the fact that the AA Sick Hats are not lathed or hammered, and in the case of the AA Apollos, they're lathed on the bottom, but not really the top, and so on and so forth. The HHX Phoenix, as far as I understand, they actually they would put the cymbal on the lathe and spin it, and they would take a piece of wood and they would basically just burn. They would, I mean, quite literally, they would put the stick on the cymbal, and because it was spinning so fast, it would actually burn. It would actually burn part, like basically. It would burn the wood of the piece. It would burn the wood that they were holding, and so the finish on the HHX Phoenix is actually basically burned wood on top of the B20 bronze that the cymbal is made out of. Anyway, these at the point that I decided to start getting these, I already had the Omnis, I already had the Swishes, I already had the Chinas, and I was curious. I basically was just curious. At that point, I felt confident that I could already do any gig I needed to with the gear that I had. But I wanted to see what these sounded like to my ear. I had heard recordings, I had seen, videos of people playing them, and I knew they were very dark, very dry. But I was curious to see what they sounded like in person. And that was also part of the reason why I didn't wind up getting the XSR Monarch or the AA Apollo, because I was interested in the dark sounds. So the more heavily hammered a cymbal is, the darker it tends to sound. So I went straight to the extreme and found the darkest ones that they offered. And so I don't entirely know why, but I decided to start with the HH Nova, which is an extremely flat profile of the bow, a very small bell, but it's an incredibly it's an incredibly cupped bell. HH hammering, and actually, if you ever look these cymbals up or you get a chance to see them in person, what you'll see is that on the bottom of the Nova and the Pandora is this kind of waffle pattern. And from what I understand, that just simply comes from them sitting on the bottom of the cymbal kiln, basically. So in fact, just like the Plague Hats and the Sick Hats, the Nova and the Pandora are not lathed at all. It differs slightly with these two, but for the Nova and the Pandora, not lathed top or bottom. Nova, very flat profile, very small and cupped kind of a bell, extraordinarily dry. extraordinarily dry and really low pitched. This was the first cymbal that I bought from this Big and Ugly collection, and what I immediately noticed is it's so dry that it's almost like, I mean, it's almost like playing on a hi-hat. Either that or it's the cymbal version of like playing grooves on the toms. It's so percussive and truly dry that it forces you to play differently. It forces you to really apply the same amount of precision to the types of rhythms that you play on it that you would if you were playing on a hi-hat and or the toms and the snare drum and so on and so forth. So it was it was an immediately a very inspiring sound because it was something I had never heard before. Next cymbal I got was the Pandora. Also a pretty flat profile, maybe a little bit more bowed, especially towards the edge. But the big difference you can see here is the bell is bigger and way flatter. Also, the other difference is the Pandora is much heavier than the Nova. So it definitely has more spread. If the Nova is dry, then I would describe the Pandora as being a little bit wetter. It's a little bit more forgiving. It definitely puts me a lot in, like, it puts me in mind of like cymbals that Tony Williams would have had, or Elvin Jones. You know, a lot of bebop drummers would have cymbals that sound very similar to this. And I mean, these two make a very good sonic combination. I look at these four cymbals in the same way I would look at like the Omnis and the Swishes. These two I grouped together because of the lathing on the bottom, but also just sonically they seem to go together quite well. Now on this side we have the HH King, and before I really dive into either one of these individually, I should say again, if you look up pictures of these or you get a chance to see them in person, what you'll see is that the top looks very similar to the Nova and the Pandora, but the bottom is lathed. It's almost the exact same type of lathing as what's on the HH Vanguard that you can see behind me, which threw me for a loop when I first saw it. I was a little surprised. So the HH King, it's similar to the Pandora sound. It opens up just a little bit more. I would say it has a similar kind of bell size to the Nova, although the Nova is a little bit more cupped. Definitely the King is a little bit more bowed of a shape, so the overtones will get a little bit higher, although the pitch is still pretty low. And because of the lathing, especially the bell opens up a little bit more. You can really... Especially this cymbal, I love the smoke that you can get out of this cymbal. It's a really this cymbal I would definitely if anybody is you know, looking to get a darker sound, more of a jazz kind of inspired sound, I would definitely recommend the King to them. The Phoenix, also I should say, all three of these so far having HH hammering. The HHX Phoenix, same thing. This one is also lathed on the bottom. The bell, this is the biggest bell, I think, out of the entire collection, although I could be wrong about that. And so it's also quite, the bell is quite prominent on this one. This one is also a very dry sound. It's similar to the Nova in that way. It really forces you to play it with precision because it is that dry. And because the HHX hammering, as you can see on this camera up here especially, you can see the difference in the HHX hammering versus the HH hammering. HHX is a bigger hammer, but there's less overall marks. The HH uses a smaller hammer, but there's many more individual marks that go into the HH. So it's just a different, it's equally dark compared to all the rest of them, equally dark. It opens up about the same amount, but it has a different character from any of the other ones because it's a different line, basically. And pitch-wise, I think they all complement each other quite well. So these cymbals, I used them a lot more during the pandemic when I was here at home, but that was mostly because I was taking a lot of classes. I was doing a lot of online classes where I had to play via Zoom. And it really, because they're so dry and because they forced me to use a greater level of precision, I found it helpful. Also, the other thing I like about these cymbals is because they're that dry and because they're not lathed, the overtones you get out of them are much more subdued. So I've also used these cymbals a lot in very small rooms. Where any other type of cymbal, even the ones that like the omnis and the swishes and stuff, would give you ear fatigue as an audience member and also as a band member. These can help alleviate that because they are so dry and smoky. In terms of music, obviously, the video that came before this video is the Denim Underpants video, which is a band that I was in mostly during the pandemic. We kind of wrote things. The other band member, his name was Jack Montilione. He's a guitar player. And pretty much all of the Allison's All-Star music was written during the pandemic when Jack and I were just taking classes together. And so a lot of it came out of just class projects, you know, and we liked it, so we decided to release it. Denim Underpants was, well, first of all, that title is actually just our working title for the song, and we never replaced it. Don't ask me. But that song, at some, you know, one day Jack just came up with that chord progression, and he recorded it and then just looped it for, you know, for however long the song goes, basically. And then it was up to me to figure out basically what I wanted to do with it. So I kind of created these little sections, these little movements, using synthesizer melodies and then mallet-based melodies and things like that. So it's one loop the entire time, and it was just, you know, as many things as I could do with that one loop. And then the ending section was just was on the drum set, me trying to play as many other time signatures other than 7/4 as I possibly could on top of it. So it starts out with a halftime triplet 4. Then it goes to a 5/4, 5/8, 6/8, I think 9/8, 11/8, and then finally finishing in 7/8 before it finishes the song. So anyway, that was kind of my goal for that. In terms of the other videos that are on my YouTube channel, the only place you can see these is the Enfierce song Fireflight. And for that song, I knew it was a ballad, so I knew that I wanted to be really gentle with how I approached the drumming on that song. And so I decided to experiment with many different things. But what I settled on was having a djembe pattern that's actually a conga pattern. 2/3 son clave conga pattern, and that helped give the illusion of a groove on the drum set, even though it's not on the drum set. It's just a hand drum pattern. So then on top of that, I decided not to interfere using snare or kick or toms or anything like that. I decided to just use cymbals to kind of just round out the texture a little bit. And so in that instance, what I wound up doing is using these 4 cymbals. Basically, I looked at it almost as chords or kind of moods. So the first mood was the King and the Nova, just playing. And so, so that built up, that went through a section or 2 of the song, and then eventually we get back to, we kind of move on to another section, and at that point I switched and I went to the second mood, which was the HHX Phoenix and the Pandora. Doing the same pattern, but just a different sound now. And because I recorded this on the Keystone kit, so I had access to the Paragon Ride and the Vanguard and the Complex Thin. So I used the Vanguard and the Complex Thin as my crash cymbals, because they were nice and soft, and I could really get this whoosh kind of a sound instead of having a really sharp crash cymbal sound. And then I actually used the Paragon Ride basically as, I mean, you can look at it as toms or snare drum or whatever, but basically the Paragon Ride was what I played all of the accents on that could be construed as a fill, because in comparison to these and in comparison to the Vanguard and the Complex Thin, it is such a sharp, bright sound. So it made such a nice contrast. So that was my thinking for Fireflight, and that's pretty much these cymbals. Yeah, anyway, check it out.
Left with an hourglass counting down till you fell again. With the static of his soul, you were deeply endowed. But little did he know, you were never one not to come back. With the static of his soul, you were never one not to come back.